Your brain hates doing small tasks, and this phenomenon is very weird because this challenges the modern day theories of how motivation works in the mind. But people like us understand that whenever we have a new goal or objective, there is a chance that our motivation decreases and our procrastination increases. But why does this happen? And I'm not going to tell you that this is your discipline levels or your dopamine levels or you should make a new habit tracker. None of this is true because this is a cognitive bias that we need to face. This is the only information that I know because I've read hundreds of neuroscience papers. My name is Drew. I'm here to help you find your purpose, get past procrastination, and follow your passion. We've all had big and small projects that we've procrastinated on, but I think there's more information when we look at the small things because they don't make as much sense. When it's a big project, sometimes it can feel overwhelming. Sometimes there's not enough reward systems in place to make us feel consistently motivated to do that activity, which is a problem within itself. But this doesn't answer why we can't sit diligently to do 1 hour straight of work that we need to do, or feel motivated to go take out the garbage. In fact, a lot of these issues encounter the traditional advice about how motivation works. And in fact, when we look at the neuroscience and evolutionary psychology about how motivation works, the main goal of motivation is that motivation is an emotion to give you physiological effects so we can go from point A to point B with a few different requirements. For one, we must survive. Then number two is that we have to have a proper reward system for doing this activity. And for three, we must believe that it is possible. Now, what's interesting is that doing the dishes, cleaning your car, sitting down and doing diligent work on a project, these are all things that we're going to survive from. These are all things that we understand that we can do. So why does our motivation lack the highest at these points? And this is something that I've never heard anyone talk about before. At an evolutionary stage, motivation is one of our biggest survival mechanisms. It is the thing that determines when we should spend our energy and when we shouldn't. Procrastination and burnout is really just the physiological effects of your brain making calculations and saying that this is not worth the effort to get the reward. Think about if back in the day when we were hunters and gatherers, if we just did everything we desired, we would eventually run out of food, resources, and probably die. So procrastination exists as a protective mechanism to make sure we keep the proper amount of resources to keep us alive. So this makes sense on a grand scale. But why does this happen on small things? First, I want to talk about the endowment effect. The endowment effect is the finding that people are more likely to retain an object that they own compared to acquiring the same object which they do not own. And this was done with a theory, you can look it up, it's called prospect theory, where they did a test and they gave people two different options. Option A is to gain $900. Sounds great. But option B was a little bit of a gamble. You had a 90% chance to gain $1,000, but a 10% chance to not gain anything at all. As you can imagine, even probably your opinion, you probably picked a guaranteed $900. It just sounds better. You're guaranteed to have some form of gain. What's most interesting is that when we flip this test on its head and we do a loss dominant test, we will find the results change. Option A is that you are guaranteed to lose $900, but option B is that you have a 90% chance to lose $1,000, but a 10% chance to not lose anything at all. The study ended up proving that most people ended up wanting to protect what they already owned and trying to protect themselves from any form of loss. This is where loss aversion comes in. Loss aversion refers to the bias in which the same situation is perceived as worse if it is framed as a loss rather than a gain. Loss aversion has been running the marketing game for years now. Anytime that you see an item on sale, something that's been rarely produced, or low in stock, all triggers loss aversion in the brain. Now, what does loss aversion have to do with our motivational levels? Motivation is a double-sided coin, and most people only think about one side of the coin, which is the general inputs to the calculation. And this could be things that, if we look at a neuroscience lens, could be our limbic system, which is our emotions, our dopaminergic system, maybe different parts like our hippocampus creating our habitual thoughts and patterns that we live out. But none of this is necessarily the full picture. The other part we need to think about is our cognitive biases that manipulate this information. I used to work in construction. I was a laborer. I used to put up fiberglass and pick up nails off the floor, working 12-hour shifts until my feet literally bled from the new boots that I would buy. Now, what this ends up doing is that I didn't like the job. And if you know anything about certain parts of psychology, you would understand that belief systems are created from repetition and emotions. Enough of one or two of these variables is enough to create a paradigm within yourself. Now, if you work a job enough and you really don't like it, you're going to start to build a value proposition for that job. And then your brain naturally creates this value proposition and compares it against other things in life. So every time I would get off of work, I wouldn't feel like doing anything but kind of being a little bit lazy. And so why does this happen to most people? Everything has two ends of a stick. There's a yin and a yang, you could say. Every time you are at work, your value of how you see your time manipulates and changes the value of how you see your free time. These two kind of coalesce together. They even each other out. So if you really hate your job, you end up really loving your free time. And this is a cognitive bias. Your free time is now something that is a high value proposition. And also, as we know from loss aversion, this is something that you don't want to lose because your brain thinks that you own this free time. Now, this is what causes so much procrastination and something that you've probably never heard of before. That value proposition is the thing that is stopping you from feeling motivated most of the time. It's not all the time. It's not guaranteed. And so something you need to understand is that your brain always wants the path of least resistance. It always wants to go from the lowest value proposition activity to the highest value proposition activity. And what creates the value is, once again, your dopamine reinforcement, the pleasure you have during the activity, and multiply that by what this activity is giving you in terms of a reward. How close is this activity pushing you to your end goals? This is your confidence, your status, the luxury, having the relationship, having the money, the free time. So value equals pleasure times distance to goals. That value of that activity or segment of time is naturally going to be compared to other segments of time or other activities by the brain. And your brain is always going to try to go to the most valuable segment within your day. So if we were to figure out these two variables for any specific segment, we can start to give an estimate of what the value of that part of your day is worth. So for work, if we talk about the dopamine reinforcement, there is basically none. For most people, work is not very intrinsically motivating. There's not a lot of stimulus. There's not a lot of fun content. Comparing it to a video game or watching social media, there's not a lot of those dopamine spikes that you get. So the pleasure might not be that great. But what about the other variable? The variable of our goals. Now, the job will help us get to our goals. But the thing is that most 9-to-5s, you rarely actually achieve the goals that you really want. You're not going to have high status if you have a traditional 9-to-5. You're not going to have complete freedom until you're 60 and retired. So if we compare the low dopamine reinforcement, the pleasure, and we multiply that by the low amount of goals that we're actually going to be achieving, we can see that together, overall, this is as an outcome of a low value. So if your job is low valued, this makes everything else that is not your job have an intrinsic higher value. And for most people that aren't entrepreneurs and they just live a normal 9-to-5, everything else is mostly just going to the gym, having free time, eating food, or hanging out with friends. So when we talk about trying to be motivated to go to work or motivated to go to the gym, why would your brain want to do that when you're giving up something that is high valued for something that is low valued? Let's talk about free time. During the time that you have the ability to go on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, watch TV, hang out with friends, this is all high dopamine activities. Playing video games. This is stuff that's engineered with billions of dollars in order to spike as much dopamine as possible. And when we talk about the factor of how close it is to our end goals, well, weirdly enough, these activities are typically pretty close to our end goals. If you have all of the money in the world, what would you really do with all of that money? Some people, they might just say, play video games, buy a better car, hang out with their friends for more time. These are all things that you get when you, quote, have the free time. Now, for some people, their goal is to go to the gym, but they're not motivated to go to the gym. Why is this? Well, let's look again at the two variables. What is our dopamine pleasure reinforcement, and how close is the gym to reaching our goals? Someone like myself have been going for years, over 5 years. Now, I can do this because when I take off my pump cover and I look in the mirror, I look good. This increases my dopamine levels. I have a set playlist of songs that I really enjoy. This increases my dopamine levels. I can have the ability of hitting a PR, and I can have confidence in the gym. All these things are stacking dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. This is all short-term feedback loops that is increasing the value of that segment of time. So when you meet someone who likes going to the gym, the reason they like it is because it's very pleasurable for them, typically. And so what is the other factor? How close are they to getting to their goals when they go to the gym? The gym is one of those rare instances that you can actually have the feedback loops of seeing the end. When you go to the gym and you start to get a pump, your muscles will quite literally get bigger. You will have more vascularity. You are seeing the outcome right before your eyes. So your goals are being met. You feel confident, you feel like you are improving yourself, and there's evidence of that improvement, and your dopamine responses, the pleasure you have at the gym, are both very high. So people who can master these two skills can make any activity feel more fun. And so your motivation is naturally trying to lead to the most pleasurable segment of your day. For some people, like myself, the gym is more pleasurable and have a higher value proposition than my free time. Therefore, I'm naturally inclined to be motivated to do that activity because the brain always wants to go from the lowest value to the highest value proposition. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you did, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.